Hello, you're watching the Telco as a Platform Summit, part of our year-round DSP Leaders coverage. And it's time now for our live Q&A show. I'm Guy Daniels, and this is the second of two Q&A shows. It's your final chance to ask questions on the transition to a platform-based business model and the role of APIs. Now, as part of today's summit, we featured a panel discussion that looked at how to maximize the telco API opportunity. And if you missed the panel, don't worry, because we will rebroadcast it straight after this live Q&A show. Or you can watch it anytime at your leisure on demand. We have already received a lot of questions from you, but if you haven't yet sent one in, then please do so now using the Q&A form on the website. Well, I'm pleased to say that joining me live on the programme today are Henry Calvert, who is Head of Networks at the GSMA, Mark Gilmore, Chief Technology Officer for Connectivitree Europe, and Grant Lenehan, who is Partner and Principal Analyst with Appledore Research. Hello everyone, it's good to see you all. Thanks for returning for this live Q&A show. Lots of questions, as I said, so let's get straight to our first viewer question. And the question asks, the panel earlier discussed the impact of AI on APIs, but, says our viewer, I think there is a threat from potentially massive volumes of short duration API calls instigated by AI and agents that telcos will struggle to contend with. How are these near future scenarios being addressed? Interesting. So, Grant, can we come across to you for your thoughts on this one about how AI and agents may impact API calls?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways we can look at this, and I know we've had these discussions in the past. One is that agents and AI could be generating huge volumes of non-monetized traffic, at which point it starts looking a little like DDoS. A wave that could cripple your network. And fortunately, we do have tools to identify and deal with those. But there's also potentially a positive side, which may sound negative, that agents and AIs could begin to generate huge amounts of legitimate call volumes that could potentially overwhelm our market predictions. This is a panel about monetizing, and that would be a wonderful outcome in terms of successful monetization, presuming that we could deliver on the offered load. So I would say let's look forward to the second problem, probably looking at moving averages and other ways of predicting capacity that we're going to need, and hope for that outcome while watching for, possibly not intentional, but overwhelming issues that could come if AIs and agents start querying too heavily. I'm sure some of my colleagues have some practical experience in this as well, though, so probably want to have a few more opinions on that.
Well, thanks very much, Grant. It's an interesting perspective that I want to be aware of. Thanks very much for sharing that one. Let's ask Henry first, shall we? Henry, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think Grant has picked up on one sort of situation where we can treat this as good traffic and bad traffic. Certainly, sort of going back in my mind that when I was working Globe in the Philippines, predominantly our network was configured to support SMS traffic, and SMS traffic was monetized, and it was the capacity driver of the network. So the ability for mobile infrastructure and telecommunications infrastructure to be able to cater for these demands, if known, is well. It's when you don't understand where the traffic is coming from and why it's coming. I think there's a lot of work at the moment to actually understand networks for AI. What are and where are these traffic sources are coming from? How should they be controlled and how should they be managed? And then it's a question about putting the investment behind the capacity and the infrastructure to be able to support that. And that gets to exactly what we're talking to here and exactly what Grant was actually saying. Needs to be monetizable because that infrastructure will need to come in the future.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much, Henry, for that. And Mark, what are your thoughts? What's your take on this question?
I think I would just build on what Henry was just saying there about the optimization of networks or the for differing workloads or differing traffic patterns that are going to emerge and that are emerging. And there's an irony here that actually to use some of these tools, and they could well be AI tools, to then work on traffic predictions, network traffic patterns, but that requires that the network, we're adopting technologies that can respond dynamically to those changes in traffic patterns and resource allocations. So, that's why we've been moving to essentially networks that can be software defined over the last few years, so that we can adapt to these varying patterns that are coming, or that drive different behavior to what we've traditionally delivered. So I don't necessarily see it as a big negative, but certainly something that we've got to continue to address. But it's no different really to what we've been addressing before in the past, as networks grow and as demand grows and as usage changes.
Great, thanks very much for that, Mark. It's good to see the monetization angle front and center as well here. Well, look, let's move on to our next question, because we have got a lot of questions in today. I've actually combined two questions into this one. So let me read this out for you. Although the functional potential of telco as a platform for the wider economy is clear, there are some caveats. For example, substitutes for Camara functionalities do exist, and key telco products are already available through non-standardised APIs with local reach. So why aren't these enough? Why do we need a new coordinated approach, such as we see with Open Gateway and Aduna, etc.? Why do we need this coordinated approach? Henry, I'm going to come to you first, but perhaps for obvious reasons, but let's hear why we do need that approach.
Thank you very much, Guy. Yes, standardization I'm going to come from, aren't I? And lack of a reduction of fragmentation in the industry. There are use cases that are very particular and that people will actually provide solutions to. But quite quickly, you will find that the reach of those proprietary solutions, runs out, whether that be across the local markets or whether that's be regional or even global. And I've got two sort of examples on why standardization is very important. Banks do not distinguish their customer base through the telco operator that customer is associated with. A bank will have its customers on all networks. If it's trying to provide fraud solutions or it's trying to provide fulfillment services, they need to work on every single network. And they need to be interoperable across those networks, especially if they're going to access it from a fintech industry through APIs. So that's the first local market reason why standardization is very important, because it can help significantly in fintech, either fraud or opportunities. Secondly, if you think about being a global car manufacturer, and most car manufacturers are global, BMW, Volkswagen, and there are other car manufacturers out there like Toyota. They sell their cars in every single market in the world, and they might have an alignment with a particular operator in a single market, but they're still dealing with 190, 200 different markets out there. They want that to be standardized. They want their cars. They want to manufacture their car modules and their modems of those car modules to work in every market that they're going to over cellular networks. So there'll be information that they are requiring, whether it be the location of the car, whether it's quality on demand that they're actually requiring, whether they want to schedule, an uplink or download to the vehicle for telemetry purposes. That needs to be consistent across the globe. To reduce the fragmentation, reduce their cost, and reduce their pain point. And it exists today. They have very complex systems to actually support different networks and different connectivity profiles. So it just makes sense. And I think I'll leave the simplification to my colleagues to explain as well why that is so important to the enterprises and developers.
Great. Thanks so much, Henry, for those examples. Really helpful. And we'll come across to Grant next, because I know, Grant, you're a big advocate and you've got strong views on listening to developers and supporting developers' needs. So what's your thoughts on this as to why we need this standards or coordinated approach?
Right. So I'm a big fan of following the money. And I also observe that this is not the first time the industry has looked for the monetization of APIs. And the first efforts had some challenges, and I think partly that came down to making it harder than necessary for developers. As much as we're, living and immersed in telecom, what we're really trying to do is expand, just as Henry was saying, into automotive and fintech and entertainment and retail and medical and all of these industries where those that are driving the value chain and the apps are not part of telecom. So the more that we can simplify it and say, this is a capability that you can use, you can become familiar with it, you know how it's priced, you know how it works, and it works the same everywhere. That's tremendously valuable. If we start breaking down into individual protocols, individual pricing models, and individual parameters, even if those are better, you've just made it harder for the buyer. So put yourself in the buyer's shoes. They don't know the business. They don't want to know the business. They realize, though, that they could benefit very much from including some of our capabilities, whether it's QoS, quickly program a SIM for an agent or a sensor. Let's make it easy for them. And I think you wind up with a standardized set of APIs.
Great, thanks very much, Grant. Well, we'll come back to Henry in a second, but I do want to hear from Mark as well. So, Mark, what's your experience in this area? What's your take on this?
Well, I think the question is a really good question, actually, because I get the sense that in the middle there, it's highlighting something that is already successfully working. They mentioned about using non-standardized APIs within a local reach, but I think therein is the answer. Using that approach, in my mind, essentially it limits the reach, it limits the market, and that may be perfectly acceptable for that particular use case, that particular product set, or something like that. That may be absolutely fine. But I really agree with Grant's point about, actually we want to try and make access into our products and services via API easy, and really reduce down the barrier to entry. And I think it is that reducing down the barrier to entry that helps. That's where then, so going with a standardized approach it helps lower that barrier to entry, or it should, because therefore the development work that goes into for one is suitable for all, and by definition then expands the market. So I think it's a really, really good question, and I think it depends upon the size or the scale of what you want to approach. In our experience, because we're wanting to work globally, then it makes sense to go down an approach that standardizes that across the globe, so that can reach out to as many as possible.
Great, thanks, Mark. Very clear. Thanks for that insight. And Henry, I promised to come back to you, so let's pick up with additional thoughts from you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, we very much, and pick up a little bit from Grant said, what he said, and I think, to Mark's point, if we look at it, we've been talking very much around the supply side and the simplification of the supply side for the developers. But we probably need to look from the developer's point of view. So it's not just the standardization of the APIs, which means they just need to code once and maybe have different authentication credentials for the operators. And if you think there's 3 or 4 operators in a market, and there's 190 odd markets out there, that's a significant amount of information that you've got to manage. So the simplification for the developer and the enterprises needs to be the channel that they're actually going through. Now, they're used to the hyperscalers, and the hyperscalers give them, hyperscaled access to store and compute. We need to almost hyperscale the telecommunications through channels. And that's one of the fundamentals that Open Gateway is trying to actually deliver on. But we're seeing aggregators that are solely going to focus on that, like Aduna, which is going to make it super simple for a developer not only to reach in one local market, but any market that they may choose. And there are other channel partners out there already doing that. Secure ID, for example, Infobip is another one. They have fairly significant reach. But how do we make that global? And how do we have that one single channel access that a developer can either reach locally, regionally, or globally?
Great. Thanks very much, Henry. And thanks to you for that question. Good question, a good set of answers. Thank you very much. Well, let's move on to our next question. This one's very topical. Flavor of the month. Let me read the question to you. A lot of talk right now about MCP, Model Context Protocol, and how this could be a replacement for APIs. But even the creators of MCP are unsure of its real impact on APIs. What impact will LLMs have on the telco API model? Goodness, a lot of acronyms in that. But this is all about the Anthropic-based MCP servers, and whether or not they may replace or complement APIs. Developers are very focused on this, but is everybody else? Grant, let me come across to you first for your take.
I'm chuckling to myself because I'm going to start in my comfortable place, which is, how do we maximize the monetization, and what is the market need right now? And look, MCP as a technology has a lot of promise. It's exciting. But what are we really talking about fundamentally here between MCP and an API? APIs are here, understood, implemented by everybody, the normal way of pulling things together, in a dev environment. On the other hand, they're very carefully structured, and you need to match their structure, where MCPs leverage some of the power of AI and the flexibility of LLMs to take input and find matches and be far more flexible. But the reality is, first of all, one, they're not here and in wide use by the majority of developers today. And second of all, we don't know exactly, when they are going to be dominant or coming online, and can always be added later. So my take is, this is a little bit of a shiny object. We probably should be paying attention to it. But the reality is, focus on making it simple, and that means talking the language, even if it's last year's language, that your developers are comfortable with, want, and use. So I would put this in the monitor carefully, research, understand camp, as opposed to the deploy and plan on making money camp.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Grant. Sound advice there. Yes, indeed, it is a shiny new thing for us to look at and take under consideration. Mark, let me come across to you, because I think you want to come in on this question as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this is one where it's a good example for telco as a community to make sure that we're looking outward at what's going on outside of the telco community, and keep an eye on what's happening with the developer environment. To Grant's point about what the adoption is of this, I I'll be very frank. I don't know enough about what's going on in that space to make a clear judgment yet. And I think that's true across the board. It's quite early days in this space, and I think the full impact on what's going to happen with APIs, I think that as a result of MCP, is a little uncertain. But there is some promise there. I think the ability to perhaps reduce some of the complexity in using lots of specialized APIs. I think as a result of the MCP, there's certain things that could come as a result of this. I agree. I think it's a watching brief as right now, but we should be paying attention and keeping an eye on this. And I think they're then about understanding whether that becomes something that is real and that we would then need to respond to. I think it's early in that, but that's my opinion on that.
Yeah, good opinion, Mark. Thanks very much for that. It is a good example of the need to look at what's happening outside telco. Great. Well, thanks for those comments. Before we look at our next viewer question, we will check in on our audience poll for the Telco as a Platform Summit. And the question we are asking you this week is, what are the main benefits to network operators of a Telco as a Platform strategy? And you can see the real-time votes appearing on the screen to my right here as we speak. Creating new enterprise services is still at the top, though it's closely followed by enhancing innovation with developers and partners. Now, if you have yet to vote, then you're running out of time. The polls will remain open until tomorrow, and then we will close them. My colleague Rayla Matra, Editorial Director at TelecomTV, will reveal the final figures during next week's Extra Shot programme. Right, as promised, we still have time for more questions, and let me read out the next one we've received from a viewer. We heard on the live show yesterday that APIs have often been added as an afterthought, perhaps for internal use first. Do we need to build API first or API native? And is there any signs that this is happening? And Grant, I'm going to come straight back to you if I can on this one about whether we do need or are building API first.
I love this topic. It's one I'm heavily published on. I'm going to slightly rephrase it and reframe it, because I think actually making an API that's easy to consume and efficient to implement and building a proper next generation management infrastructure based on autonomous network principles are exactly the same goal, precisely the same. And in fact, if you look at, the shining examples of this outside of telecom, like if you go to Azure or AWS and order a capability, and particularly even a network capability, you will fundamentally see that it is defined in terms of what the customer is looking for. We often refer to those as SLA parameters, and they're the same as intent parameters when we're building these next generation networks. So when we take things as a service and say, for example, what I really need is a service from point A to point B, and I need this bandwidth and this quality and this availability, you have defined exactly what you need for an API to be easy to process. Now, on the other hand, if you take an API and glue it on top of a legacy stack, to put it sort of, in simple terms, you're going to be maintaining that code and creating new details and permutations as little network changes occur for the rest of your life, your professional life, which is high labor, high cost, inefficient, brittle. So my strong belief is that as we move toward APIs, we should be consuming them internally. As we move toward APIs and are consuming them internally, it's automatic to expose them when we choose commercially, and we will have a greatly simplified operational environment with lower costs and hopefully nearly immediate activation when, for example, one of the steps is not move a truck to install a piece of equipment. But I'd love to hear my colleagues' opinions on this as well.
Thank you very much, Grant. Well, let's go across to Henry first, shall we? Henry, you spoke earlier in the program about the need to be sort of AI native. What about API native?
Yes, for sure. And I think there's been a long way to go to support what Grant is actually saying. The TM Forum deployed their ODA architecture, which is really looking at the internal fulfillment functions, both in business and also in operations and maintenance, fault management, customer care, etc. So, that framework is starting to be adopted through the significant generations that have actually happened through the mobile industry. So we're now at the 5th generation. And there's also been a change in sort of how the standards are coming together. In the fact that we now are looking at more virtualized functions across the network. So to consume those functions, there are different protocols, different orchestrations going on, and to enable them through APIs seems a very sensible way to do it. So internally, we can actually have those businesses operating, that everyone says, drink your own champagne, eat your own dog food type approach, understand, change your networks, move from a telco to a techco type sort of things. And I think it's, it's very difficult when you've been from a vendor supply point of view, and that vendor supply now needs to open up its interfaces. You've seen a lot of work in Open RAN recently, with the RAN intelligent controller, which is all going to be enabled, all is enabled with APIs or interfaces that can be addressed through APIs. So, it's starting to open up, which is highly exciting. And then we've got the practicality of where everyone is at in their maturity of moving from a telco to a techco, if we can use that language in that sense. And the last thing I'll sort of say on this is, this needs to happen because there is so much value in the fulfillment of a network and a service to a customer and the endpoint. And there's so much information, contextual information, that if it can be exposed through a NAS or network APIs, which is the open gateway type activity that we're actually doing, there is value that can be created for enterprises. And those enterprises not only using the information that they have from their products and services and infrastructure that they have, but also mashing that up with fintech or financial information and also telecommunications information, connectivity information. And that's very powerful when you start to bring those things together. And we need to hear about those requirements on the demand side, so those APIs and those functions, those capabilities get exposed, and that should be driven into the standardization bodies, so they start designing the networks and right down at the stack level to be API native. So yeah, I'm all for it. I think it will take a period of time, but I'm all for it.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Henry, for those thoughts. Watch this space. Let's see how this develops. Okay, let's move on to another viewer question. This one we received fairly recently, the past half hour or so, and I'll read this one out to you. What are the best monetization models for APIs? Should we be looking at a marketplace or ecosystem play? And what is the right balance between hyperscalers, aggregators, and telco-operated marketplaces? It's monetization again. Mark, can I come to you first on this one? Have you got any thoughts about maybe how you're approaching it yourself?
Yeah, let me talk from my perspective. So, and what we're doing at Connectivitree, whether it's the best monetization option for APIs in general or not, that's another question, I think. But what we're doing to use APIs for monetization, I think, is probably the way we're approaching it, is creating an ecosystem, which in and of itself can also be described as a marketplace, I suppose. But the idea is to be able to allow those within that ecosystem to trade connectivity services with ease, in as near real time as we can get at. Grant mentioned earlier on, if you can avoid, if you don't have to do a truck roll or get a person in a van to site to do something physical, then can we actually turn services across multiple operators, not just in our own network? We can do that in our own network, but across multiple operators, do that in minutes rather than in days or weeks or months. For some of the big high bandwidth long distance services, which is the area in which I operate within Connectivitree. And so the approach we have taken, and it kind of builds from the previous question about are there examples of building API native in the first place? Our whole business model has been built on the idea of being able to consume, order and consume and deliver services completely via API, and really simplify that approach and reduce down lead time to cache, reduce the lead time to order, and really make the whole experience better for our end customers and for us as an operator and those within our ecosystem. So we've taken that approach of actually starting from when we started from scratch, and we were blessed to be in a greenfield environment, to actually look at it and go, how will these services be consumed today, rather than how they were consumed in previous times, or in a legacy approach, and really tackle it from that way forward. So that's a model we're using. Now, I don't work in the cellular, in the mobile space, so therefore I don't know. I wouldn't be able to comment whether that's the best monetization way for using APIs within the mobile space, but certainly that's what's working for us.
Great, thanks very much, Mark. That's a good insight from what you're doing there. Grant, can I come across to you, because you were saying earlier about following the money and monetization is key here. Here's a monetization question. What's the best models for APIs? Any thoughts on this from yourself?
So I think really the best models for APIs, is the model that exposes it to the greatest number of buyers. I think there's a couple of ways this can be done. One is making APIs available in a place that can be integrated by others who come find you. They know how to find a global set of APIs, and the work that the GSMA is doing and some of the suppliers are also involved in is a great way of doing that. I think there's also some value, though, to going out and inserting, hopefully, these aggregated APIs, not one at a time, operator by operator, into the native places where developers and industries outside of telecom live. Being in the Azure marketplace, being in the AWS marketplace. And I'm sure there are quite a few out there that I'm not familiar with, particularly in various vertical industries. So I think there has to be a combination of making it really easy for external industries to find and consume what we have as a business and as a set of capabilities. But there probably is some value to outreach and establishing relationships with others. But I think back to things we've talked about before, not at the cost of balkanizing the market and making it more complex or more difficult for developers to buy from operators.
Sure. Great. Thanks so much, Grant. Appreciate those comments. And Henry, I think you want to come in on this one as well? Yeah,
thanks. And I just want to express the fact that, if we take a demand side viewpoint from APIs, everyone's saying, show me the money, aren't they? APIs, show me the money. I think there's two factors we've got to make, and we've talked a lot about in the first factor of making it simple and making it accessible for enterprises and developers to use the network-based APIs that are being exposed. And we've had a lot of discussion around the supply side. I think from a GSMA's perspective, and to be honest, quite a lot of the industry, whether it's Linux Foundation and Camara, or whether it's TM Forum in our discussions and the operators, is we need to educate the enterprises that these APIs are available. I think they're well hidden at the moment. And we're coming up to Easter. So, I'd just like to say that, there's an Easter egg hunt out there at the moment to find, what is the monetization. And when you find that Easter egg, there's some nice sweet chocolate in the middle of it. Fundamentally, people are not going to be in the world we live in. Fundamentally, people, if they don't understand it's there and they don't understand it exists, they'll never be able to try it, and therefore the money will never flow. So that's what I'm going to try and make sure we do over the next, couple of quarters, is ensure that we talk to the right enterprises, the developers, so they understand that the APIs exist. And my ask out there in the industry of telcos, hyperscalers, or anyone like that is, please make these APIs available simply, and under a structure where the developers can try them out first, rather than spending 3 months in creating a contract, of something, of money that may not exist yet. So let's educate the enterprises that they're there. And then two, make it really simple so they can use it, so they can see what business model and what value can be created.
Great. Thanks very much, Henry. So, good ideas there, and good luck with that. And Mark, let's come back to you.
I was just going to add, there's two ways of looking at the monetization of API. One is selling the API itself, but actually what I was talking about earlier was more about using APIs to monetize our services, to using APIs as a simple way of being able to consume telco services. So there's two sides to that. We're predominantly working in that latter one of APIs as a means to be able to easily and swiftly and efficiently consume telecom services.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. That's great. Right. Well, I think time is pressing. We might get one or two questions in, but here, let's look at the next question we've got. We've had a flurry of questions in the past 15 minutes or so. Let me read this one out for you. Who should be leading the API development efforts? Is it the open source communities, or is it the telcos themselves, or is it a combination of both? Right, Henry, let me start with you. I'm pretty sure I know where this might be going now.
Yeah, very simple answer for me. The Linux Foundation run the Camara initiative. That's an open source project and repository. It's supported by not only telco operators, but also developer and ecosystem partners out there. We need to come together. The collaboration that we do through Open Gateway is not only the GSMA, it's Camara, it's TM Forum. It'll be the Metro Ecosystem Forum as well, I'm sure. This is about, everyone to come together. The developer community is an open community, so that's the way it needs to be.
Fantastic. Nicely put. Thank you very much, Henry. Okay, so I think, you know what, we do have time for an extra one. Bit of a wild card question here because I've just been handed it literally about 2 minutes ago. So let me carefully study this and read it out for our panelists. Have any of our panelists got thoughts on bundling APIs with other non-core telco services? Some way to create specific value for specific verticals to make a more compelling network API monetization use case? Grant, thoughts from you on this one? Because this sounds quite innovative.
It's actually a fascinating question, and I think whoever's asking it has their head going down the right place. Of course, the challenge is we need these to be fairly standardized. But if we look at the web as our model and not the structured telecom industry as a model, we've typically had these ideas of mashups, right? And you took a piece from, Google Maps, and you took a piece from, location services, and you took a piece from 911 dispatch, and suddenly you had a way to help first responders. So, when we can start building sub-assemblies, think about somebody making a car. They used to buy, raw bolts and raw leather and raw steel and raw glass. And now there are specialists making interior assemblies and seat assemblies and dashboard assemblies, and it's much, much easier for the OEMs. I think some clever folks could do exactly that and say, hey, we know what you really want. You don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. You need to be able to, take a 911 call, identify its location, find the closest emergency responder, and dispatch it. Let's make that an API, right? And there are probably hundreds and hundreds or thousands and thousands of these. So I just found it a very intriguing question. I think the answer is heck yes. I think the caveat to that is, but once again, if we use that as an excuse to break standardization and make them all work differently, that's not such a great idea. But if we're just bundling up and mashing together existing standard APIs into a nice, easy to use, pre-done service, that's a terrific idea and probably a way to kickstart certain verticals that we as an industry believe have legs and need to be promoted.
Thank you, Grant. Yes, good question and good answer as well. Thank you for that. Henry, would you like to come in and comment on this idea of bundling APIs with non-telco services for verticals?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is where the value is going to be created. I'm 100% sure. I think there will be value that it comes from direct network APIs. And even the network APIs that we have are being mashed together. So you've got SIM swap, you've got number verification, you've got device location, all creating an anti-fraud API just out of the APIs we have. But also that could be extended into financial inclusion, where you're taking tenure, maybe banking transactions from the APIs, mashing it up with telco tenure, telco habits that's actually happening, and you can work out whether someone is actually going through a authorized push payment fraud activity at that point in time, and stop the call. And restrict the payment that's going on. If you take it, quality on demand is not really an API by itself. It needs to go in. I mean, cars might use it for provisioning and what they're actually doing. Gaming people might use it for delivering a better service. But that's just one part of the whole thing that people are going to actually offer as the use case and the service in what they're actually doing. So I totally applaud the fact that people are asking these questions, because the value is going to be created by mashing these APIs up. And that just gives us a whole universe of untapped potential out there. Rather than at the moment, I do feel somewhat people get stuck in authentication. Maybe we go to multi-factor authentication. One-time passwords are being replaced by different APIs, which is very telco sort of stuff. So yeah, let's mash up as many things as we can and see what we can discover out there.
Thanks very much, Henry. Yeah, it promises to be very exciting. Mark, and we'll come across to you as well for your comments.
I'm speculating here, but I wonder whether the previous question about model context protocol might start to come in here, and could be something where we see a development there, if that takes off, because it seems to be, from my limited understanding of that it's that kind of dynamic. That dynamic or specialized or mashed up, I suppose if we could call it that, world might exist. So I'm speculating a little bit here, but that may be a realm, taking it to the next step beyond what Grant and Henry have just mentioned there, because I completely agree with their approaches there. But I speculate whether MCP might have a role to look at in that in the longer term, mid to longer term.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mark. Yes, indeed. Well, it's good to speculate, and we need to do more of this. And this is an interesting area for us to develop in the months ahead. Unfortunately, we are out of time now. A couple of questions just come in from some friends of the show, but unfortunately we can't get to those today, but thank you for them. Thanks to all of you for joining us for this live programme. And that's a wrap for this year's Telco as a Platform Summit. Thanks to all of those who submitted questions. We did try and cover as many as possible in the time we had available. You can watch all of the programmes from this year's summit on demand from our website, featuring this stellar lineup of industry experts. Thank you also to all our speakers and sponsors and viewers for supporting the DSP Leaders Summit series. We will be back next week for our special Extra Shot programme, when I will be joined by TelecomTV's Ray Lemaitre, and we'll take one final look at the highlights from the summit, the main talking points, the key takeaways, and of course the final poll analysis. And for those viewers watching us live, we are going to broadcast today's panel discussion immediately after this programme, so stay with us. The next topic for our summit series is the future of RAN, and you can take part in that next month. For now though, thank you for watching and goodbye.